Hello, everyone. Hi, and welcome to Alta Live. My name is Beth Spotswood. I am Alta's digital editor, and I am so excited to welcome you today for a conversation on trees, the trees of the Southland, LA County, more specifically, Santa Monica. This Alta Live, if you don't know yet, we take stories from our magazine or our website and kind of expand upon them more with a conversation with the subject, with the author, something like that. So this article, Seeing the Trees for the Forest, is by Joseph Giovannini. And we're going to talk more about that today with Matthew Wells. I'm so excited to have him join us today. Matthew is the public landscape manager for the city of Santa Monica and SoCal. Santa Monica strives to be a beacon of sustainable local government. Prior to his role, this is the best background ever. I'm really enjoying it. Matthew served as the director of tree preservation for NYC Parks, as an arboricultural officer for the London Borough of Camden, and is a tree surgeon in his local English village. He is a chartered forester with a master's degree in arboriculture. You can teach me about that, and urban forestry, and unique international experience in urban forestry. We are so excited to chat with him today about specifically his role in the city of Santa Monica and the trees of Santa Monica and the kind of role they play in the life of the residents of Santa Monica. But before we dive into that, I want to tell you about Alta. Alta is an award-winning quarterly magazine and website focused on California and the West. You can subscribe to our magazine. It's called Becoming a Member, and we really encourage you to do that. It costs a lot of money to make this beautiful magazine, to do events like this. For $50 a year, you can support us. You get 4 gorgeous issues of Alta. Right now, with your membership, you get a book, a collection of all of the cartoons that have appeared in the first 5 years of Alta. We call them Altitudes. And you can support our work that way. You can also join us as a digital member for $3 a month. You can come to our events like this one. Alta Live is free. The California Book Club is free. We've got really incredible people coming up. Danzy Senna, Tobias Wolff for upcoming authors. You can join our newsletters. We've got a bunch of weekly newsletters. Monday Book Review. The Thursday newsletter, Alta Live, comes out as a newsletter. You can support us that way. Or you can just buy this single issue. If you just want to read about Matthew and the trees, grab this issue. It's fascinating. You can visit altaonline.com to learn more about all of this. And I hope that you do. This is my strong sales pitch, but it comes from the heart and it's my job. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later this afternoon. We will send you links to where you can read Joseph's article, where you can find the historic trees of Santa Monica. There's this cool website that has a map of all of the historic trees, where you can sign up for next week's event, future Alta events that are coming up, and anything else that Matthew and I that pops up today that we think you might find interesting later. Thanks for zooming in and that letting us know where you're zooming in from in the chat. I see White Salmon, Washington, DC, Klamath Falls, Oregon, Benicia, California, Flagstaff, South Carolina. Thank you so much. Please be chatty in the chat. There's also a Q&A button to ask questions for our guest. And again, we're going to dive right in with Matthew. If that's Matthew, do you go by Matthew, Mr. Wells?
Either one is fine. Yes, either one.
Um, Thank you so much for joining us. You are coming to us from presumably Santa Monica.
Correct. Yes.
I'm gonna take a shot in the dark here. You are not originally from Santa Monica. How, can you tell us kind of why urban forestry for you? What brought you here?
So, quickly, my parents were pharmacists, but they loved gardening. So I kind of grew up in an English garden and the Cotswolds. I don't know if many people know the Cotswolds, but in the West Country of England. And then, you kind of get to the bit where you're going to go to university now, and I didn't really know what to study, but I always enjoyed that. So I did landscape management at Reading University. And then there was no work. It was like during a recession, but there's always money to climb trees and prune trees. So that's how, I always liked chainsaws for some reason as well. So that's how I became a tree surgeon in my local village. But then realized, because I had a degree, maybe that, and actually after a while I realized that there was a lot of people much better at climbing trees than me. So you have to kind of pick your strength. So then I moved I decided I wanted to get more into studying trees and learning more about it. So to build on my landscaping, I started studying more about what we call arboriculture. They pronounce it slightly differently here, but urban forestry. So I started to learn more, and then eventually I got a job in central London in Camden. I don't, many of the listeners, and thanks again for inviting me to talk today. I'm very honored, and thanks for everyone for listening in. But yeah, Camden, which is a fantastic place to learn about large, old Victorian park trees, and
And
it's
shopping vintage, right?
shopping. I'm not sure. Is it shopping? Well, Camden Market's a big one where everyone
That's what I'm
used to,
thinking of. Yes.
yeah, where everyone used to go to get a leather jacket. Where I went to
Yes.
get my, because I like my rock music, so I got my first leather jacket, I think, in Camden. So, and then after I was in Camden for about 4 years, I thought my sister was working for the United Nations and she was over in New York. So I thought, hey, I wouldn't mind working overseas. So, I got an agriculture visa actually, and was able to move over to New York, where I started as a tree surgeon over there, which is a bit scary, like on Fordham University, those giant American elm trees and stuff. And again, it was, yeah, this isn't quite for me. I need to get, back doing sort of more sort of what we call tree officer work, sort of more sort of walking around telling people what to do to trees. And luckily I was enough to get a job with the New York City Parks Department. So I became a forester in Brooklyn. And then I got promoted eventually. I did a couple of promotions, but eventually to the director of tree preservation citywide in New York City parks. And I was, lucky to be there during Mayor Bloomberg, during Million Trees NYC, Plan NYC, all the big push for urban greening. And that was fantastic. And I learned so much over there. And I'd really sort of gone from a sort of very sort of well-funded urban forestry program in Camden to like a massive forestry. We prune our trees every 20 years and, we're just wandering, it was just sort of like not enough resources, trees absolutely everywhere, trying to plant all these trees for million trees New York. So that was exciting and I enjoyed that. But then, I'm not very good in the cold weather. I'm not very good in the hot weather either. And I was lucky enough to come to California a few times. I was kind of fell in love with Santa Monica the first time I visited here. So eventually I was lucky enough to get the urban forester job at the city of Santa Monica. So I moved over here. And I did that for about 5 years, and then I got promoted to be the public landscape manager, which I am now, and I've been doing this for 5 years. So I've been here about 10 years. So in the US, about 20 years overall. So I've been very lucky to work in a number of different places doing sort of urban forestry and tree care. So it's
I think this is the first time we've had a scientist on who said that their job started because of a love of chainsaws. So kudos to you on that one. All right, so can you tell us a little bit about Joseph's article focuses on two cities specifically that have really robust urban forestry programs. One is Pasadena, the
yes.
other is Santa Monica. Can you give us some background on kind of modern day Santa Monica? We don't need to go all the way into, thousands of years back, but in terms of the forming of the city kind of proper, what does their urban forestry plan look like? How has it evolved over time?
So what we do know is like probably in the 50s and the 60s, there was a big push to plant a lot of trees. And we actually have a big book, a tree planting book, like an historical sort of all the maps, basically historical maps. And literally the urban forester at that time literally wrote Phoenix canariensis, which is Canary Island date palm, on a street and said planted on this date. And then on another street, it would have been like camphor trees. On another street, it was pine trees. And so we have this tome, and actually it's being used right now in the Santa Monica City Museum because they're doing a piece on urban forestry and the trees of Santa Monica. So we know back then that they kind of, literally every block or every couple of blocks, they planted the same species. And we've got all that, whether it was palm trees, whether it was broad-headed trees, we have all that. And that really set the foundation of what we're managing today. We kind of, in Santa Monica, we have like monocultures essentially, but we have a series of different monocultures. So we have the same species of tree on either one block or two blocks or a couple of blocks, and then these all crisscross. And that's all set up on our, now we're lucky enough to have computerized databases. So we have all these trees mapped. We know how often we prune them, how often we inspect them, when we planted them, how often we water them. So our pruning program is pretty much dialed in on that. But I think that's really how the city was set out. And then in recent years, there's also actually, by the way, I should share this. Can I hold this up as a little prop?
Please.
Santa Monica's always been crazy about trees. One resident actually wrote a book called the Trees of Santa Monica. You can still pick it up. But this is, not many places the size of Santa Monica has its own dedicated book on trees. And this is great. And this talks a lot about the trees that we have in Santa Monica. But in recent years, we now have an urban forest master plan. This was from, this is my copy, so it's a little bit used. But this is from 2011, and then we redid it again in 2017. But it talks about what we're trying to do in Santa Monica. It talks about all the different species, and actually, really the city's broken up into, even though Santa Monica is only 8 square miles, it's broken up into like 400 management units. I don't know if you can see that either, but we manage all the city in these tiny little blocks, these management blocks. So on each management block, we know how many trees we have, we know what species they are, we know how often we prune them, we know if a tree dies and we remove it, what we're going to replant back. So all of this is sort of mashed together, and then we know about species diversity, because that's a big thing. Probably many of the listeners know about the importance of having a diverse urban forest. So though some cities have a lot of diversity per street, we don't have that. We have single species per street, but what we have to make sure is that on the crossing streets we have enough different species. So no species is more than 5%. No genus, which is the family name for a species, is more than 10%. And we've planned that all out. We've mapped that out, and we can kind of see that in 50 years time from now, we'll have a much more diverse, but because it's more diverse, it'll be more sustainable and resilient, which is kind of from a sort of scientific point of view, that's what we want. Because right now we're struggling with a few pests and diseases here in Santa Monica.
Is that why, on behalf of those of us that don't know why it's important to have diversity among your trees, um, is that why? Why is it important to have diversity in trees?
There's two types of diversity. There's species diversity and there's age diversity. So it's age diversity is because we don't want everyone dying all at the same time. And species diversity is because trees have a tendency to get a disease, and then like a hedge or in the garden, it attacks one tree and then it goes up the line. So what we want to make sure is if we have different species, then it might take out a block or a street, but it's not going to take out huge, vast amounts of the city. For example, in New York, we had areas in Brooklyn, like community boards, which is an area of population of 100,000, where street trees, 42% of all the street trees were the same species. So you can imagine that an area that's at the size of Santa Monica, 42% of the trees are the same. And if a disease attacks those or they get flooded like they did with Superstorm Sandy, then suddenly you've got a real problem because you're losing lots and lots of trees very, very quickly. We've got problems right now with ficus trees. And the trouble is as well is we tend to use, they come from the same nursery. So not only are they the same species, but they're probably genetically very similar as well. So they might have the same mum and dad. So that means that from a sort of a pathogen point of view, things can move much, much quicker through those populations. So you can go from having lots of beautiful trees to having no trees literally over a couple of years. And, trees represent time. And, it's unfortunate because sometimes we remove trees and we really know that, in our lifetime, we're not really going to see that beautiful canopy cover back again. But that's kind of the beauty of urban forestry is we're really investing in the future the whole time with what we do now.
How much of your job, if the audience is like me and has 8 million questions going through their mind right now, because this is fascinating, Matthew, thank you. There's a Q&A button at the bottom and we will get to as many of them as we can. How much of your job is maintaining what's existing in Santa Monica? And dealing with, we've got a dead tree on Elm Street, and so this quadrant needs to be pruned, etc. And this person's got a problem with tree X over here,
Mm.
versus what's it going to look like in 50 years? We've got a plan. I mean, I imagine you need to compartmentalize so much of it.
Yeah, we need to make sure that we're sort of like working at like a local level, right? But we need to be globally thinking about what's going on with the resource as a whole. So it's resource management, and that's kind of the difference between a culture and urban forestry. Is a culture is the person that's going to come to your back garden and look at your apple tree and your other tree, and that's what we call an arborist. My job is a bit of that, but I have to kind of think also about the bigger picture. So I've in Santa Monica, we have 36,000 public trees. So I can't get overly focused on one tree and spend too much resource trying to manage one tree. We have to think about, is this tree worth saving? If we have to do all this to it, should it just be a removal and a replanting? And that's kind of where forestry comes in. And it's interesting because in my career in London, English people were obsessed by, you know, maintaining everything from a rug to a piece of furniture to a painting. So we were hyper focused on individual trees. And then I remember I moved to New York, and my then boss was this big sort of gruff guy from Buffalo. And he sent me out doing inspections, and I'd never really driven before around New York, and I was driving around, and I came back with my vast amounts of notes about what we're going to do for each tree. And he basically looked at me and said, if I have to do all this pruning to that single tree, I'm just going to cut it down and plant another one. And that was kind of the realization that, when we get to a grander scale like New York or even like Santa Monica, is you have to be more forestry based. Yes, we can try and save trees, but ultimately what's most important is we're putting enough new trees back in the ground. And then we're thinking about species diversity. We're trying to think about resilience. We're making sure that what we're planting isn't going to damage the sidewalk, isn't going to grow into the overhead wires, isn't going to upset the local residents, isn't going to drop poisonous berries all over the place, isn't invasive, isn't, whatever, isn't going to require vast amounts of water to maintain it. So yes, we're always got one eye on the bigger picture, and one eye on what we're doing on the ground. And I also in Santa Monica, we're very lucky. We've got a very engaged community, and we have a 7-person urban forest task force. So every 2 months, I have to report to this task force with my 2 staff. I have 2 foresters staff. And we have to talk about what we're doing, and we have to talk about the challenges. And we have various metrics that can sort of demonstrate, are we doing a good job? Are we doing a bad job? So we're looking at stuff like, how many trees did we plant? How many do we remove? How many trees do we have versus how many can we have? What is our species diversity? What are our environmental benefits we're getting? How many of the trees we're planting? How many of them surviving after 5 years in the ground? Yeah. So, and then we're looking at canopy cover as a whole. And canopy cover is like when we look down from above, how much of the city is covered in trees? And there's various metrics and expectations. And is that going up or is it going down? And we know, for example, in Santa Monica, that in the public realm, like for our street trees and park trees, we're seeing that resource increase, which is great because I'm doing, my team, we're doing a good job. We're increasing canopy cover, which we want, get more environmental benefits, we get more shade, we maintain a beautiful tree-lined city. But what we have a problem with is we don't have any private tree protection guidelines at the moment. So people on their own land, they can do whatever they want to their own trees, which means that a lot of them are being removed to build bigger buildings. Santa Monica is very
Of
popular
course.
for development. So what we're seeing is, yes, we're sort of, I think for our last study over between 2014 and 2022, we gained 22 acres of urban tree canopy on public land, but we lost 42 acres on private land. And for me as a forester, what is problematic is a lot of city mayors and stuff. They always talk about, oh, we want to increase canopy cover, but unless you look at both private canopy and public canopy, unless you manage both of those areas, there's no point saying, oh, we're going to have 30% tree canopy by 2030, which I see a number of cities do, because we can't really outplant what's going on in the private realm in the public realm. I don't think. Like I can't be planting street trees quicker and park trees quicker to offset all the trees that are being removed to build bigger buildings on private land. We just can't do it. So for us as well as urban foresters, we're also trying to educate people that trees, and hopefully, and it's great, like the article, like in Alta magazine, sort of shows how important they are. Then, but they're not luxury items. They're very important to the infrastructure of our city. I think I'm very proud of the fact that when you come into Santa Monica, hopefully you come from the city of LA, and I live in the city of LA, so don't get me wrong, I love LA, but you go from where there's very few street trees to not only is suddenly the road flat and you're not like bouncing you're not bouncing up and down in your car seat, but also there's trees everywhere. And that you kind of you acknowledge you're in this city because you have all these trees everywhere. And I know one of the things maybe is equity, because Santa Monica is a rich city, so it can
Right.
afford all these trees, and that's obviously a problem as well. And trees, I think, since the dawn of time, have been associated with wealth because they do cost money to have and maintain. But I would say that they're not just a luxury item; they're an essential item, and that's the sort of, I think, the mindset that we've got to change towards many people, because much of my job is just people complaining, well, it drops leaves on my car, can you just remove it? Or it drops fruit, or it's shading out, or now I can't see the seaside, so I can't see the ocean anymore. Can you remove it or whatever? So people's tolerance levels are very surprisingly low. So a big part of my job is arguing with people, unfortunately. But I guess that's what,
Arguing with rich people that have views of the Pacific Ocean and there's a tree there and Jesus. Okay. I want to get to some questions from the audience. I still have a million more for you, but Marg wants to know, and I think a lot of people are curious about this. Can you talk about using native trees? How important is using native trees to street planting, to encourage kind of native fauna?
Yeah, and this is a big debate point within the industry, and it's extremely important. We try and use natives as much as we can, but we also have to accept that a sidewalk, say on Main Street in Santa Monica, native species, just because they're native to the climate doesn't mean they're native to growing in a small hole cut in a sidewalk on Main Street in Santa Monica. So where we can use native trees, like in our parks, in our bigger parkways, in our medians, we do use native trees. But sometimes we have to accept that, unfortunately, we have to look to Australia, or we have to look to South Africa, or we have to look to other places to give us these trees that are really very, very tough, require very little irrigation, very little soil, what we call soil volume, which is basically underneath the sidewalk, how much, good quality soil can they access? A lot of the time, there's very little under there. So we have to plant very, very tough, tolerant trees if we want any trees at all. I do think that supporting our local wildlife is extremely important, and the best way to do that is by using native species. But again, making sure that we're not we're smart about it. We're not putting them where they're not going to survive, where they're not going to grow well. And also thinking about diversity at the same time as well, because we have got problems with pests and diseases with some of our, plane trees, California sycamore, with some of our oak trees as well. So we have to think about those things as well with what we do.
What is the biggest headache that you've got right now on your desk? What is the project that is just stressing you out the most today?
The biggest issue we've got is called branch canker. It's on ficus trees, and it's killing off our big ficus. So Santa Monica for years has always not removed our ficus, even though they've destroyed sidewalks and they've caused lots of infrastructure damage. We've paid for private property that's been damaged to be repaired. We've paid for the sidewalks to be put down flat. Around us, all other cities, sidewalks get lifted up. They just remove the ficus trees. Not all of them, but most of them are removing ficus trees, putting something back. So we've worked very hard to keep these beautiful big ficus trees, the canopies that we have. Santa Monica is kind of famous for it. But now we've got this disease that's arrived. We don't know if it's because of the 2 very wet winters we've had. It's because of some of the way we've been managing them, but it's taking out our ficus trees very, very quickly. And we've lost 130 big ficus trees in the last 2 years. And those are the real big trees that you see out there. So, they're significant, and people are very upset about it. They're up in arms about it. And that was some of the, again, reasons for having diversity, not overly depending on certain species or certain trees. So what we're actually thinking about is, one concept we've had is on where we have ficus is actually to have kind of like natural fire breaks. So maybe have nearly the same species for the whole block, but then have a different species in between, because a lot of the way diseases spread as well is that trees underneath the sidewalk, the roots are latching onto each other. So these root grafts and pathogens will go straight through from one root to another. So like you see in a hedge, when the hedge all dies out and it starts at one end of the hedge or in the middle and it goes out either way. So having something in the middle so the roots are not interconnected makes a big difference, again, to the resilience of the urban forest.
Wow. All right. I'm going to switch gears for a little bit. Can you tell us about what are heritage trees?
So heritage trees are through our Urban Forest Task Force, 7 members of the community selected by City Council. We take nominations. We had to shut it down with COVID because we weren't meeting, and we've lost a bit of staffing, but it's something that we're going to start up again. But the heritage trees are public trees that members of the public have said, this tree is really the best tree in the city.
You nominate the tree, like,
The member of the public nominates it, and
okay.
then it goes in front of a board, which is basically 4 or 5 of us sitting around, and we look at it and we look at the nomination, and we see if it's in the Trees of Santa Monica book, if it's historically referenced, if it's connected to anything else. We look at the species, the rarity, the size of it, the condition of it. And then we award heritage tree um, status to. It used to be 5 trees a year, and they get a plaque, and they go on the website.
Wait, where's the
Um,
plaque go? Not on the
Plaque
tree.
goes on the tree. Yeah, it's a botanical plaque. So two, believe you me, if you're an urban tree, two little screw holes isn't
Okay,
is the
okay.
least of your worries. But they are botanical grade plaques, and we do check on them. But the plaque goes on it also so people can make sure they're looking at the right tree. But they really are an ability for people to kind of find their favorite trees or find these heritage trees, make sure they're looking at the right tree, and learn a bit about the tree, the species. Because sometimes, like for example, we've got one of our coral trees on San Vicente, which is a big median, which has got all these beautiful coral trees on it. But we only select one of those, even though it's a row of, I don't know,
Sure.
50 coral trees.
What happens when someone nominates their beloved tree and you reject it? I mean, do you do that? Do you say, no, this doesn't make the
Yeah, one guy wanted to nominate a tiny little pine tree and call it the Roger Moore tree. And I'm a big James Bond guy, so I was pulling for it, but the rest of the committee members didn't want to do it. So, but we kind of have to say, hey, thank you, but it didn't make it. We try. Again, it's supposed to be a fun thing. It's supposed to be a way to celebrate our trees. So we're not overly strict on it. But it's only focused on public trees right now. We don't do private trees. In other places, it might be on private trees as well. But the reason is because people think that once we've nominated it, we've got some sort of planning control over the tree, which we don't, which unfortunately we don't have.
So if I have a big, beautiful mansion in Santa Monica and there's a big, beautiful, healthy, thriving tree that has been there for 150 years, and I would like to build my yoga wing there instead,
Yes.
I can chop that tree down, no problem.
Yeah, and that's very upsetting for a large portion of the population and members of the city council as well. That's something that we're looking at as a city because we're very proud of our sustainability plan. One of the first cities, I think, in America to have a sustainability plan of the fact that we're trying to build a green and healthy community. So that's something that the city is looking very hard at. And actually, it's looking at you talked about Pasadena, it's actually looking at the ordinance that they have for protecting private trees and looking at whether we can do something similar here. But private landowner rights are very strong in the US. So and there's a housing crisis in LA. So there's
Yeah.
lots of things that are coming in on us. And I know one of the things we talked about before this interview was this idea of equity about why don't we have trees in certain places. And it's a lot of it is not just the fact that trees are expensive. They're expensive to plant. They're expensive to maintain, which is one real problem about why there's not enough trees, but also is space. You need a lot of space for trees. And unfortunately, in our poorer neighborhoods, the buildings tend to be multi-use, the sidewalks are smaller. Um, if we think about Maslow's theory of hierarchy, right, with people that are like occupied with, food and shelter, they're not necessarily going to be thinking, oh, I really want a tree outside my building. um, that's another reason why is we just not, sometimes we're not being requested to plant trees in those places. And that again is something as urban forestry and something that I saw firsthand in New York, is it's like we can't wait for someone to ask for a tree. We need to go out and plant them. And that was a really cool bit in Plan NYC and the tree planting push where we identified these trees for public health, where we literally went out, looked at where we had high population, low canopy cover, and I think they looked at asthma levels as well, and they were planting trees in those neighborhoods. So that was where the first million trees, like of the 220,000 street trees we planted, the first trees went in on those neighborhoods because of those factors. A city like Santa Monica, it's harder to differentiate between low canopy and high canopy because we're a very small city. But places like New York, I think it's very, very important to make sure we really are planting the trees where they're most needed first.
I imagine your kind of department needs to work in partnership with a lot of other departments in Santa Monica. Like, I mean, you must have to deal with sewage all the time with the roots or with animal control. Can you talk a little bit about just kind of like how your work
Yeah,
intersects with funky
yeah,
departments?
we get, and then water department we're always working with because the ficus roots, the good old ficus roots, they've grown into various things or they've swallowed up the water meter or so on and so forth. Animal control because there's beehives or there's as soon as there's a tree, anytime there's a tree involved, they immediately try to give it to the public landscape division. So yes, but also we're also the police department. this is a bit embarrassing. Don't tell anyone, but the police drone is stuck in a tree. Can you get one of your can you get your tree the tree guys out to save the drone? They're better with the drone now, but when they first had the drone, we had to save it a few times. Um, but so it's there's a lot of things that you just couldn't believe happen with urban forestry and various problems that we face. And it is, like you say, it's a bit like wrecking parts half the time with some of the things that people want. And trees do attract interesting characters. I'll put it at that. And we have conversations with them. And one gentleman got very upset because he used to walk his crows every morning, and we were pruning trees, and his crows were getting upset.
It's
And then
crows.
yeah, he had pet crows, and you were thinking you'd got to be joking. And then he sent me footage, and he is literally walking his crows around the park, and it's very bizarre. But I enjoy the fact that people are passionate about it. I enjoy the fact that people care, and also, hopefully, as your article showed, is that they make a huge impact to how a city looks, and how it's viewed. And they really are, in my mind, they're the kind of, street trees are really when you used to get in the mine with a canary, if the canary pops it, it's time to get out of there. I do see that having a big, healthy urban forest is a good sign of a good city and a good place to live and bring up your children. And because we know that trees do vast amounts of things more to us than we appreciate. Whether it's environmental benefits, cleaning the air, reducing down air conditioning costs, providing homes for our fellow creatures to live. They do important things as well as making our cities look beautiful. So, very yeah, understood. Very good.
Barbara wants to know, an LA native is Barbara. Are you familiar at all with the history of sycamore trees being planted throughout LA neighborhoods? Why sycamores?
Like in terms of California, I guess California sycamores would be because they're a native. But we don't, we have some London planes here. We're using Mexican sycamore plane trees. They're a riverbed tree, so we have problems with them. They catch a disease called anthracnose. So this wetter weather is causing them problems. And actually, we were just talking today in Santa Monica on Pico Boulevard. We've got a row of sycamores that have done horrible. They've been in the ground for 20 years. They haven't done very well. But if you give a sycamore tree, even a California sycamore, and they always kind of lean a little bit, as people might know, they look fabulous in people's front lawns. But they do need space and they do need water. And obviously, with this sort of, with the pushback on drought and concerns over how much water we have, we've kind of pulled back from a little bit. But I think that if a tree can develop a big, healthy root system, the amount of water it needs is far less. If it has a healthy root system, you don't have to keep pouring as much water onto it. And that's a big part of what I would advise listeners to do if they're worried about their own trees is get rid of your turf, put down mulch, create healthy root growing conditions. Because if you do that, the ability of that tree to withstand drought, to withstand pest and disease, is far greater.
What Linda asks, and I had this kind of question for you as well, is for those of us who aren't in Santa Monica or don't have, um, an incredible team of urban foresters, what are your top three tips for suburban cities or cities at all with kind of medium populations, to start this urban forestry mindset?
Um, Top tips are obviously engage with your local foresters. Hopefully you have some. There's some great organizations out there, like the Arbor Foundation can help communities get up together and talk about, ways to get ordinances going and to talk about urban forestry plans. I mean, just because there is no forester doesn't mean that keen volunteers can't do it. And then set up some basic metrics of what you're looking for is how many trees did we remove? How many trees did we plant? How many trees can we plant? And then there's also lots of grants available through the US Forest Service. There's also support from the US Forest Service. They have local urban foresters that can support communities. Also there's the International Society of Arboriculture. So there is a lot of information out there and available. But the main thing is start somewhere. Start in your own yard, start outside in your own parkway. Make sure that if you can have trees in your parkway, you plant trees. Again, mulch them, give them water. Make sure you plant the right species, do some research. Look at all those things. It doesn't have to be huge. It can start small.
Mark asks and this is a great question. paying for all of this? Can you talk about municipal funding in California for tree planting and maintenance? Is there uniformity or best practice guidelines, especially in light of these equity issues?
No, I don't think so. My funding comes from the general fund, so it's coming from taxpayers' money is being allocated into urban forestry. So yeah, so I mean, after COVID, we took some significant cuts into our program. We pruned far less than we have in the past. We're planting less than we have in the past, and we're seeking to get those refunded. There is grants available again through the U.S. Forest Service and through Cal Fire. We tend not to be successful because one of the things they always look for is uh, uh, um, what's the correct term? But it's low income neighborhoods. Those tend to be the places that get funded.
Yep.
But there is grants, there is funding out there, and it is available. We have excellent organizations, volunteer organizations, Tree People in LA. If any of you check out their website, they're always
That's the
doing
name of it,
fantastic
Tree
work.
People?
Tree, Tree People.
Okay.
They're very cool. That's one of the original sort of tree orientated organizations, I think, in certainly in this area. But there's, also, there's other groups out there that are doing things. We have LA Conservation Corps that are doing good work out there as well. But I know under Mayor Garcetti, they try to allocate more money towards urban forestry. They hired the first city forester for the city of LA, which is Rachel Millard, who actually came from Tree People. I think she was at Tree People for a while. So it does, yeah, you are looking for your leaders really to invest money in urban forestry. But part of what we have to do as urban foresters, and I learned that firsthand how to do it well, and that was in New York, is how urban foresters also have to be good advocates for the importance of trees. And then the best thing to do is not then take that information, in my mind, in my experience, is not to take that information and give it to the politicians, but take that information to give to the well-connected residents who then take it to the politicians. Because if it, if it goes that way around, it's usually more listened to rather than thanks, Matthew. I appreciate what you're saying, and that gets filed away. Versus if you get in a population or a community that's excited about trees and wants to do something, and then you give them the information. So basically, you arm them with the information on why trees are important, where they can plant trees, what they should be planting. That goes a long way. And then, I think, and then again, try and, reach out to some of these organizations for help. There's a lot of toolkits out there to help people understand, how to, set up a program. But it's not easy. But if you're willing to put the time and effort in, it is possible. And, I'm always happy to help as well. I do think urban forestry is something about us trying to help each other. I do believe urban forestry is needed for as a nationwide effort, if not a, worldwide effort. And we're a very good, friendly industry. And I've been very lucky to be involved in this industry. So, just don't be don't be shy. Reach out, and if I can help, I can help. But I might at least be able to point you in the right direction or connect you with people I know who can help you.
And I realize we've gone over time and we've got so many questions that we won't have time for. I'm going to ask you two more quick ones. One, speaking of connected residents, Christina Gandolfo took this photo of you for Alta Journal, gazing off into the distance. Can you tell us just about this moment, please?
Um, so we were looking for we were looking for a place to have a photo. I'm not quite sure where my gaze came from. And as I said to you earlier, I felt that it does look like I've just discovered a new country or a species of tree. Or maybe I'm just thinking about mortality. I don't know. But that street is very important to me because it's, La Mesa Drive in Santa Monica has these giant Moreton Bay figs. Not that a lot of people think I'm Australian, but I'm not. And obviously, Moreton Bay figs are from Australia. They're far too big for where they are. But again, Santa Monica, most places might have just removed them because they've caused so much sidewalk damage. But we've kept them because we love our trees in Santa Monica. But when I first came to Santa Monica, I was on an exchange program. I was doing an exchange with George Gonzalez, who was the chief of forestry for Los Angeles, and he said, "I'm going to take you to Santa Monica for the day." So I went to Santa Monica and I was out with their staff, and we were on that street, La Mesa. And there's these big houses. I'm coming from New York. I wasn't, coming from England to New York, and I was like, I love California, but I hadn't ever really been here that much. And I was like, oh my God, look at these big houses and these big trees, and this place is really cool. And I was like, yeah, famous people must live here. And at the same time, Mel Brooks goes jogging past, going, hello, gentlemen. And we go, oh, hello, Mel. And that was, and I was like, I love this place. I've got to come. I've got to
Mel
live here.
Brooks. Get
Yeah.
him on board with the trees. I would
Yes.
say yes to anything Mel Brooks asked of me. Last question for you, Matthew Wells, Santa Monica tree person. Do you have a favorite tree in Santa Monica, and will you tell us which one it is?
Favorite tree. It is. It is probably a tree on. I know we talked about La Mesa a little bit, but the first picture I had is a little bit up. It's like halfway up on La Mesa. There's a fantastic Moreton Bay fig tree. We have a very well known. We have two very well known Moreton Bay figs in the city. We have the one outside the Miramar Hotel, which they're about to redevelop the hotel around it. Basically, it's the one that you always see in the adverts. It's absolutely massive. That's the big hotel on Wilshire Boulevard. We have that one. That is actually a landmark tree. We don't have many landmark trees. That's actually a landmark tree. There's also one called Morty, which is in one of our brand new parks, Tongva Park, just outside City Hall, which is
The
again is
tree is
fantastic.
named Morty.
Yeah, because it's a Moreton Bay fig.
Got it.
So I don't know who came up with the name. Probably not the, not. Well, I guess it's kind of good. It's anyway. It stuck. It did stick. Um, but anyway, those are Moreton Bay figs as well. But one of the ones, the first one I had my photo taken under up the road was it's my favorite tree probably in the city. I think they're fantastic species. I like Australia as well. But we're very lucky. Santa Monica as well. We have great stands of pine trees, our palm trees are incredible. And we have Palisades Park and all the palms on the beach. I just think that it's we're very, very fortunate in Santa Monica, and I've been very fortunate to spend some of my career here. Hopefully, leaving the urban forest, as they say, better than when I got here. Hopefully, my canopy data shows that the number of trees we have is creeped up as well, so that's a good thing. So to carry on that, and I think that's my metrics. I'm not sure anyone will remember me in 20 years time, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. But yeah, so it's trees are great things, and hopefully if there's one thing about this interview is I do tolerate them, because I know they can be painful. I park my car under a tree and sometimes I swear and I criticize and it drops thumbs and I'm like, oh my God. And then I remember, actually, I'm an urban forester. I should be, because I tell people the whole time, we're not pruning that tree. We're not doing anything, even though they're complaining about the same things I'm dealing with. But do tolerate trees and do, plant more trees and realize that you're really investing and you're giving a gift to people in the future, which I think is the nice thing about it. And I think so many things is like pass on. The people who planted the trees we enjoy now are probably long gone, and we have to have the same mindset with the work that we do. And I think that's a healthy thing for us to be doing as human beings as well.
Matthew Wells, you are an absolute delight. And I know our audience, Kirsten, is like, I'll remember you. So
Thank you.
thank you so much for taking the time out of your obviously very busy schedule to speak with us. It's been so informative and enlightening and inspiring. I'm really, really grateful to you. Thank you. Everyone else, I'm sure you had a great time. Thank you so much. Again, please consider supporting Alta. We will send you an email with links to all of this. If we didn't get to your question, I'm so sorry. We'll find a way for you to reach out to Matthew. I won't give out his email address to everyone, but it was such a great conversation. I'd like to invite you to join us next week. We're going to be speaking with someone who is using endangered animal DNA to clone endangered animals in San Diego and try and build back the species back up. So we will be talking about that. His name's Ben. We'll be talking about that next week. Thank you so much for coming to Alta Live. And again, Santa Monica's amazing Matthew Wells. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate it.
Take care, everyone. Bye. To trees.